Sentire Media.
Welcome back to A New Life in Italy, the podcast where we explore everything you need to know about living, working, and establishing your life in Italy. I'm Samantha Wilson, and today's episode is critical for anyone in the process of applying for your Italian citizenship or even thinking about starting the journey. We have some very big news. Recently, there has been a significant change to how Italy handles certain citizenship cases, specifically those impacted by the minor issue. If you're planning to apply for citizenship through Jure Sanguinis, the right of citizenship by blood, these changes could directly affect your application. And today we're going to break down exactly what this new directive means, how it impacts those of you with this minor issue, and what steps you need to take right now to protect your claim to Italian citizenship. We'll also be joined by our head citizenship researcher, Terry Wilson, who's going to walk us through the latest updates and help you understand what this all means for applicants moving forward. So if you're on the path to Italian citizenship or thinking about getting started, this episode is for you. I'm Samantha Wilson, Chief Dreammaker at smartmoveitaly.com, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show where each week I take you behind the scenes of what it's really like to move to Italy, introduce you to some fascinating people, answer your questions, and show you how starting a new life in Bel Paese is possible for you. Okay, so let's get into this. Before we dive into this new change, let's just take a moment to go over the basics of Italian citizenship and how people can qualify for it by descent, or Jure Sanguinis. Italy offers citizenship Jure Sanguinis, which means that if you have an Italian ancestor, you can be eligible for citizenship regardless of where you were born or raised. As long as you can trace your ancestry back to an Italian citizen and your line of descent meets certain conditions, you can qualify. So you can only be Italian if you were born to Italian people. Jure Sanguinis means by blood or in blood. So here's a quick overview of how this all works. First of all, you need direct Italian ancestry. The key to applying for Jure Sanguinis is proving that your ancestor was an Italian citizen and that they passed this citizenship down the line to you and maybe your kids and so on. Now, this often means tracing your birth, your marriage, and your death certificates to show a clear line and a clear connection between every generation. This is what we call the bloodline. Now, number 2 means that there is no interruption in the bloodline, and this is critical. In theory, Italian citizenship passes automatically from a parent to a child as long as the Italian ancestor did not renounce their Italian citizenship before the next was born. This is what's called naturalization. Essentially, it's when the Italian gives up their Italian citizenship and takes on a new one, like American, Canadian, Australian, or so on. However, complications can arise if, for example, your Italian ancestor naturalized into this other country before your parent or your grandparent was born. Because in theory, then, your parent or grandparent would be born to an American person, not an Italian. If, on the other hand, the Italian ancestor did not naturalize or naturalized after the next generation was born, then that generation was born to an Italian person, and the right to citizenship is intact, and forward you would be eligible. Now, the third main thing to consider is that there are 2 main paths. Most applicants can apply for citizenship either through their local Italian consulate where they're living, if they're living outside of Italy, or directly in Italy at a comune, a local municipality, by establishing their residency here. Now, each path has its own challenges, but both lead to the same goal, which is recognition as an Italian citizen. However, one of the biggest hurdles that some applicants face is the so-called minor issue. And it doesn't mean like minor like it's not a big deal. It means minor as in age. And this issue occurs when a minor child under 21 years old, of course, it was under 18 years old if we're talking after 1975. But typically most of these cases fall before 1975. So when the child was under 21 years old. If this is the case, then they would lose their claim to Italian citizenship because their Italian parent naturalized before that child reached adulthood. Now, until recently, this minor issue was mainly problematic for those filing no appointment or 1948 cases, so anything through court. In fact, in 2022, a Roman judge ruled against the 1948 case and essentially ended all court cases that had a minor issue, meaning that naturalization was completed when the next generation was under the age of 21. But this only applied to court procedures in Italy, not consulate or comune cases. But a new directive from Italy's Ministry of Interior has just changed the game, affecting thousands of applicants. Now, here's where things get complicated. On October the 3rd, the Ministry of the Interior issued a directive that aligns with the previous court ruling back in 2022 with this minor issue. While it doesn't legally bind every consulate or comune, it strongly suggests that they follow these new guidelines, making it much harder for applicants with a minor issue to successfully claim citizenship via the traditional paths like a comune or at a consulate. In fact, I would argue that it will make it pretty much impossible to succeed. So what does this mean for you if you or someone in your family was a minor when their Italian parent naturalized before the applicable age? Well, to help us better understand this issue, I've brought in Terry Wilson, our head citizenship researcher, who's been digging deep into this new directive and is going to help us understand what it all means. Well, hello, Terry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
This is a pretty big development for anyone looking to apply for Italian citizenship, especially those impacted by the minor issue. Can you start by explaining what this new directive from the Ministry of Interior means in layman's terms?
Yeah, simply it means that the government is taking into account a court ruling that happened 18 months ago and incorporating it into their guidance to communes and consulates. Simply put, the minor issue is if you have an Italian ancestor, the person that is the one you're relying on, the person that was born in Italy, if that Italian ancestor naturalized, when the next in line, when their child was a minor, that child loses their ability to be Italian and loses their ability to pass on their Italian citizenship. Even though the child never chose not to be Italian, and even if that child was born in the United States and probably didn't know that they were Italian, it still says that that minor loses their ability to pass it on. The court ruling in
22, I think it was.
Yeah, 2022. Was exactly that. It says that parents are the ones in control of child's citizenship as well as children's everything else. But when it comes to citizenship, that the parents was responsible for the child's citizenship, and so therefore the courts wouldn't allow to hear it. And now the government has tried to give itself to come in line with that court decision. The interesting thing is that the court hasn't really influenced the Ministry of Interior in the past. The government hasn't come in line with other court decisions, like, for example, the 1948 case. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it has, and I believe it's an attempt to try to relieve some of the pressure from the consulates and the court system by unfortunately eliminating people with a minor issue from being able to apply.
Right. So this issue, of course, like you said, back in 2022, affected or impacted all of the court proceedings. So that would be, of course, a no appointment case and a 1948 case. But we were only seeing a few incidents where there was a little bit of pushback from some comune. I know up in Verona, there was a comune there who was not accepting a minor issue, but just on their own decision. And then also, I think the consulate in the U.S. in Philadelphia there was a little bit of rumbling that was going on about a year ago about this issue, but nothing had come out from the ministry until now.
Yeah, and the ministry, and it came out of the blue. To be honest with you, this sort of happened on Thursday. They published it. It came out of the blue. Again, many of the legal people around Italy didn't believe the government would come in line with a court decision because they hadn't in the past. Again, using the example of 1948. Philadelphia, they put a lot of files that had minor issues on the shelf as a result of this, the court ruling, and said they're going to wait for direction from the government. Mm-hmm. I guess they got it. Mm-hmm. And as well as Verona. Verona sort of took a decision from the court and incorporated it into its commune decision. Mm-hmm. Pretty unprecedented, but they did that. And again, at the end of the day, people with minor issues aren't allowed to apply.
Right, because this is exactly why it's so important, is because the court issue, a court decision, the way that they apply the law or apply the practice in court has always been different from how they apply the law in practice at a commune or at a consulate, local consulate. So now what's really happening is the ministry is saying, okay, well, what they've been doing in court, we're now going to apply to all of the different ways that people can claim their citizenship, including commune and consulate.
Yeah, and really, a lot of people don't realize that there's really two streams in Italy to get your citizenship. One is through the consulate and commune, we call it the administrative side, and one is through the courts. And really, the rules for each haven't really infiltrated each side, right? The courts made a decision based on the law that they saw, and the communes and consulates made decisions based on essentially the dictates, the circulars that put out by the Ministry of the Interior. And a lot of times they didn't really intersect. They were two separate streams to get citizenship. So
right, but this is a big issue for thousands and thousands of people. So one of the big questions that people will have is whether this directive will apply to all of the commune and consulates, or if there's any flexibility left in the system. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. I think personally, it's a directive from the Ministry of Interior that governs both consulates and communes. And it'll be very difficult for communes or consulates to disregard it for a couple reasons. One big reason is it allows consulates to relieve some of the pressure of the amount of people making application by denying those application. It allows them to say no so they don't have to do any more work or work in that area. It gives them a precedence to say no to people, to deny people their citizenship. And, whether it works or not, I don't know. But I think it would be very difficult for a commune or a consulate to disregard essentially their boss, giving them some guidance on how they should make decisions.
Yeah, like a gentle push in sort of an unspoken, well, a spoken, but a gentle push in the direction to make this decision. So although I guess it isn't a legal binding directive telling them they must do this, as in Italy, there's always a little bit of discretion. However, your opinion is that it's probably not going to pass for most people.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a discretion about this at all. There's a lot of reasons that it's a guidance, but I think there's very little discretions for communes to allow people with minor issues to go forward.
Right.
And I think it's going to infect or be in the court system as well, because now even if there were a few courts around the countries that didn't take the precedent put out by the Court of Rome, the Court of Cassations, the Supreme Court of Rome, in those cases, those courts will now be presented with this Ministry of Interior's document that says, here's the guidance that's even going to push the courts that may have allowed minor issues a little farther to be able to deny them as well.
Right. So for people to understand that the court system in Italy is run on precedent, which means that even though this judge in Rome made a decision, it's not binding by all the other courts. Every judge effectively has their own autonomy to make a decision. And that's what we saw with the 1948 ruling in 2022, is that in most cases, if there was a minor issue, a judge sided in all communes or all courts decided to follow the rule of Rome, but not all of them. So some of them certainly made their own decisions and ruled in in favor of the applicant, even if there was a minor issue. But what you're saying now is because there's this extra hammer, in a way, this extra directive, that if you try to pass a minor issue, let's say in the courts for a 1948 case, hoping the judge will have discretion, you're thinking that the state now will bring forward this directive and explain that, look, now you really can't have any discretion.
Yeah. Essentially, the government, who you're suing for your citizenship when you go to court, the government's going to have another piece of evidence to provide why it should be denied. They're going to have the precedents from the Supreme Court of Rome, but now they're actually going to have a document from the government that says we're in aligned with that decision. Here's another piece of evidence, Your Honor, for you to make this decision in contrary to approving the person's citizenship. So I think it's going to affect even the court systems in the small amount of cases where courts were accepting people with minor issues as citizens.
Right. So it's blocked. Anybody with a minor issue for any avenue, whether that's commune, consulate, or trying to squeak through the cracks of a 1948 or no appointment case. So it's pretty much closed the door for anybody with a minor case issue. So let's say someone is already in the process. And I know there are people here probably listening to this now that are already in Italy, already in the process or about to apply for their citizenship at a commune. So what are the legal avenues for these people to challenge this decision?
Well, if you're already here, there's a big problem in the fact that I don't believe a commune is going to accept your application. And that really means that you have to go back to wherever the home country you're from, the United States, Canada, whatever. I think your options, if you're already in Italy, are pretty small. Essentially, you've got to go back and regroup. Now, the regrouping could be another thing. Now, one thing I want to say is the minor issue does have a bit of a caveat in the fact that it does have an out in the fact that if you can prove that you're the minor child emancipated from that parent beforehand. So therefore, the easiest way to prove that is if, for example, it was a woman who was the next in line child, their parent naturalized when they were a minor. But again, minor means under the age of 21. If that lady had have been married at the time that their parent naturalized, then they were emancipated from their parent, and therefore their parent wouldn't have control over. It's a very slim idea that you have an out there. But the government does put out in their circular, there is this out.
Right.
So there is an out, but really it's very, very small because the majority of people were living with their parents up to the age of 21,
of course.
particularly women.
Right. So let's give an example. If your great grandmother was married at 19 and her father, who was the Italian, naturalized when she was 20, it doesn't matter because even though she was under the age of 21, she was no longer in his care. So what he did didn't impact her. Therefore, she could retain her citizenship. Yeah,
100%. And the other option is to prove that the child no longer lived with the parent. Again, marriage is the easiest way to prove they didn't live with the parent. But if we can somehow prove through census or something like that in the fact that the child no longer lived with the parent when the parent naturalized, even though they were a minor, we can maybe prove that there was emancipation. How you prove that to a commune or a consulate is still a bit vague.
Right.
But there is that out there. And again, I think it's a very small out for a very small amount of people.
Right. So I know that the directive or the circular also said specifically that if you have already, even if you had a minor issue, if you've already been recognized as an Italian citizen, this does not impact you. They won't revoke your citizenship. So that's important for those of you who are worried about that to understand. Yeah. But also what's interesting because of the two ways that this procedure is applied, either court or administratively, there really isn't even an appeal process now,
No.
because you would have to appeal in court. And if you have a minor issue, you can't go to court, correct?
Yeah. So essentially, what it is it's a denial by the consulate because they're saying we're not going to accept a minor issue. The recourse, if you get a denial, what they believe to be an unlawful denial at the consulate, your recourse is to go to court. Unfortunately, you can't go to court because
You
courts
have
won't
a
accept
minor
a
issue.
minor issue. Yeah,
Yeah,
courts
it's
won't
like a
accept a minor
circle,
issue.
right?
So there's really no recourse for anybody who has a minor issue um,
So it's
because
just
you can't
over.
go to court. It's over.
It's just
It's
over.
over.
Okay. So if someone is affected by this minor issue and now finds their case over, it's completely blocked. Let's talk about alternatives. What else could they do? Let's say they really want to have their citizenship for one way or another. Let's give them some options.
Yeah. So the when I talk about regrouping there previously by going back and regrouping, one of the ways you can regroup is to look at the spouse of the naturalized Italian. So in many cases, we're talking about the naturalized Italian being um, being the father, being the male side of the family. In many cases, the female side, the spouse of that man, never naturalized for a lot of reasons. She didn't have to naturalize. Prior to 1922 in the United States, women didn't have to naturalize; they were automatically naturalized by their husbands. So you might want to look at the other spouse, the spouse of the naturalized Italian, to see if you have a 1948 case where a woman passes on her citizenship prior to 1948.
Right. Still keeping in mind of the minor issue, though. The age is still important.
The age is still important, but if the female never naturalized or received derivative naturalization, she was received essentially forced naturalization by marrying an American citizen or a newly American citizen,
Mm-hmm.
then her line is still open. The courts in Italy believe that a woman still has her ability to pass on her citizenship because she received derivative naturalization.
Right. So
So,
even when we're talking, we're talking about a female there, because back then, we didn't have the rights as female to pass our citizenship forward. So this is when that transfer of citizenship would be before 1948.
yeah,
But even if your ancestor passed that citizenship forward after 1948, as long as there is no minor issue or there was for sure just no naturalization, you can still pursue your citizenship through a commune or a consulate case. But it just has to be, it could be through a female. Before 1948, you go to court, no minor issue. After 1948, they can still proceed with a consulate or a commune, correct?
yeah, that's correct. And women um, after 1922 in the United States, 1947 in Canada, and UK, they were allowed to make their own choice about naturalization. And some women never naturalized; they didn't see any reason to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, therefore, after 1948, a woman passing on her citizenship is perfectly fine through a consulate or a commune. Prior to 1948, it has to go through the court.
Yeah, I really like this option because I think there's going to be a lot of people that have this option available. And simply because there was some weird rumor going around for years that you actually had to exhaust the male line before you could even look at the female line. So some people just never even looked this way, never even checked the
Yeah,
1948, the female side. So although that wasn't true anyway, you always had the option of one or the other. I think a lot of people fell into that bucket. So I think it's good news for a lot of people because we know that Italians married Italians. So quite often, both sides of the line, if not both sides of your parents' line, all four ancestors were Italian. So there's an opportunity. But let's say that it's completely dead. There's no way that you can go through any other line. What else can people do to try to get their citizenship?
so there is you can get your citizenship through naturalization. If your grandparent or parent was an Italian citizen, you can come to Italy and be here for 3 years and gain your citizenship through naturalization.
Yeah, this is a lot faster of a way too, because as long as it was your parent or your grandparent that broke the line, essentially, normally if you move to Italy and you live here, it would take up to 10 years to get your citizenship through naturalization. I know they're all talking about 5 years now, but right now it's 10. And however, it's faster for you if your parent or grandparent naturalized breaking the line. It's only 3 years of legal residency.
Yeah, and the only the only stumbling block or hurdle you have to come over is finding the pathway to be here in the first place.
Yeah,
So visa or whatever to
a
be here in
visa.
the first place. But I mean, at the end of the day, it definitely is faster.
For sure. So they can still get their naturalization or they can still have citizenship through naturalization, not Jure Sanguinis, but naturalization after 3 years of legal residency if they can find their way here in the first place.
Yes, and
Okay,
absolutely.
great. Okay. So with this recent change, do you think there's going to be any other, because you say this came out of the blue, is there any chatter out there? Is there any things that you foresee
Yeah.
further legal challenges that could shift how Italy handles citizenship?
Yeah, well, we know that the government has a committee that talks about the whole realm of citizenship, Jure Sanguinis, through the blood, uh, and how that is affected. They're talking about a language requirement for citizenship. They're talking about reducing the amount of generations you can go back. Really, the conversation is around how connected the person, the applicant, is to Italy. So the language requirement makes you connected to Italy because you know the language. Going only back to your grandfather would make you more connected. Potentially staying here for a period of time prior to applying for citizenship, whether it be a year or whatever. Making that sort of the push really is to have the applicant have more of a connection to Italy than had previously been done before. Again,
Mm-hmm.
those other sort of things gives that sort of connection. So
Right.
essentially, they're not having people in other countries applying for citizenship who may have never been to Italy or been to Italy only once.
Right.
There's a drive to have that connection.
Right. A reason to be Italian, a reason to get your
Yeah,
Italian citizenship.
yeah,
Now, and that's, I think, a really good final point is that Italian citizenship laws in the realm of many countries and many nationalities, they've been very, very generous. I think they're maybe one of the most generous in the world where you could go back as far as you can. And thousands of people are trying to claim their citizenship. And I think it's important also to remember, and simply because most of our listeners are North American, or Australian, that it isn't just the Americans that this is talking about. This is actually, the Americans have a very, very small amount of people who are trying to claim their citizenship. I know it feels like a lot when you can't get an appointment, but there's other countries that are completely flooded with applicants trying to get their Italian citizenship, where the government has to look at this backlog and look at the reason why there are so many applicants and do something to free it up a little bit.
yeah. Like countries like Brazil, an appointment in Brazil can take you up to 12 to 13 years to get an
Mm-hmm.
appointment.
Yeah.
So that's 4 or 5 times what it is in the United States. And in the United States, and English speaking people making application to be in Italy as a citizen, they're not even in the top 5 of the most
Mm-hmm.
countries or most people that are trying to get Italian citizenship for a variety of reasons, for a variety of migration reasons in the 1920s through the 1960s.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's a huge pressure, and the government is looking for ways to relieve that pressure.
And this is one of them.
And
Right.
this seems to be one of them. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for walking us through these updates. It's clear that this new directive adds this new layer of complexity to an already really intricate process. But knowing your options is key to navigating it successfully. Okay, so to recap, the new changes to the minor issue will make it much harder for those affected to apply for citizenship through the traditional comune or consulate routes. However, if your case is not impacted by the minor issue, you have nothing to worry about, and you can continue to proceed. If it does, there are still legal avenues to explore, whether it's shifting to a 1948 case or pursuing other paths to citizenship, like moving to Italy on a visa and applying for citizenship through naturalization after 3 years. If the idea of a visa is new to you, we do have a free booklet that describes all of the available visa options on our website at smartmoveitaly.com. And of course, I'm going to put that link in the show notes. If you're listening and worried that this new ruling might impact your citizenship case, I highly recommend reaching out to our citizenship team, because we're here to help you figure out the best path forward, whether that's reassessing your eligibility or exploring alternative strategies. It's time for listener questions. Just like the old radio call-in shows, my team has picked 3 listener questions, all left on our voicemail. I have no idea what these questions are, but I haven't been stumped yet. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Hi, Samantha. My name is Giovanna, and my husband and I live here on Long Island in New York. And my question is this. We are returning to Italy in a few weeks and going back to the town in Tuscany, which we hope to find a long-term rental. But my husband and I were wondering, once you secure a long-term rental, is it up to the tenant or the landlord to take care of problems that might arise in the apartment? For example, problem with a faucet or a problem with a door or window. We've heard stories that maybe it's up to the tenant to take care of these problems. Unlike America, where the landlord usually takes care of them. Thanks for this question answered.
Hello, Giovanna. Well, I hope you have a nice trip and a successful one here, finding a long-term rental in Italy. Your question is a good one, and it's very different here in Italy than what you might be used to. In law, when you are renting a property, you are responsible for the smaller things. So cleaning the pipe, like if your sink gets clogged or the toilet gets clogged or these kinds of minor things that are happening in your property, they're all your responsibility. You can't just call the landlord if the window latch isn't working any longer or the pipe is blocked, unless, of course, it's a major plumbing issue. Anything major, like, like I said, a major plumbing issue or electrical system needs to be changed or problems that way, that is absolutely the owner's responsibility. But all of the small things that you may be used to calling a landlord on, you don't do here. It really, consider a rental to be when you take the keys and you sign a lease here. This is your home. So you treat it like your own home, and you have to do those minor repairs to keep the property in the same standard that it was when you started to rent it.
Hi, Sam. This is Mary Rose from New York. I'm a senior and I live on Social Security and I live modestly. I was wondering, is it possible to be able to afford to live in Italy? I know there's a lot of tax rules, and I'm really concerned that I have enough money to comfortably live and stay in Italy for the rest of my life, because it's my dad's homeland, and Italy is just in my heart. Well, thank you for your answer. I look forward to it, and have a blessed day.
Well, hello, Mary Rose. Thank you for the question. And I have some pretty good news. If you live, modestly in the US, then you probably could live better than modestly in Italy. Of course, depending where you decide to settle. In most places in Italy, cost of living, people realize about 10 to 20% less when they move here. Yes, there are taxes in Italy, but as a new arrival, there's all kinds of tax benefits that you may be able to benefit from, which will bring that burden quite low and probably not impact you in any way, or if it is, just a very small way. But it's offset by the cost of food and the cost of housing, and of course, all of the great things that people do here for entertainment, which typically is what costs a lot of money in North America. Here it's pretty free. There's always a festival. There's always somewhere to go to and always something to see. And almost always it's free. So I would say I wouldn't worry too much about the cost of living. What you should think about is how you're going to get here. If you do need a visa, then you'll need to focus on your income in order to qualify for that visa. But otherwise, coming here to Italy and living, I'm sure you'll be very surprised and happily surprised that it's very affordable.
Hi, my name's Charlotte Panico, and I'm looking to move to Italy. I'm starting the process. I'm at this time waiting for my birth certificate to be coming in the mail, which unfortunately it takes quite a time to get that, but I'm reading on the webpage that people are being declined, and I would just like to know, what are the odds of you getting accepted? How many do they allow per year, per se? And if you could help me with any insights into the process, I would be very grateful for it. You know how overwhelming it can be.
Hello, Charlotte. Thank you for this message. I'm going to assume because of your last name that you are Italian, and perhaps you're talking about getting your Italian citizenship. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to with getting your birth certificate, or if maybe you're talking about a visa. So Italian citizenship, if we're going to talk about that, there are some very specific rules that you need to meet to enable you to claim your Italian citizenship. And that's mostly that your ancestor did not break the bloodline by naturalizing before the next in line was born, or before the next in line was born, or 21 years old. If that's citizenship, then there isn't a number of citizenships that they allow every year. If you qualify, you qualify. You have your right to citizenship. If, on the other hand, you're talking about a visa, well, there is for the elective residency visa, which would probably apply for you. First of all, you don't need your birth certificate, so that's good news. If you are applying for the ERV, there is no limit on how many ERVs they give out. It is outside of the decree flussi, which is the immigration numbers every year. So there is no limit. If you qualify again for the visa and you meet all of the requirements, then you will get the visa. Pretty good. It's just a matter of preparing and applying for whichever one is best for you. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about visas, citizenship, property, and, well, really anything about moving to Italy that you would like me to answer in an upcoming episode, please feel free to send us a voicemail at our website at smartmoveitaly.com/podcast, or just click on the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can find all of the resources and the links to the people and the places that I mentioned in this episode inside the show notes. Ciao for now. A New Life in Italy podcast is a production of Sentire Media, created and hosted by me, Samantha Wilson. Production by London Nero, and with special thanks to Ali Frothingham, Sofia Pisana, and the entire team at Sentire. Follow A New Life in Italy wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, if you're thinking of moving to Italy, whether full-time, part-time, or for a lifetime, come and see me over at smartmoveitaly.com, and we'll help you get here and start living your best life. And don't forget, if you love this episode, please rate and leave a review. It's much appreciated. I can't wait to meet up with you again next week, same time, same place. Ciao for now.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. and we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.